Chapter 1. The Outcast of Erythra Prime. In the heart of the sprawling metropolis on Erythra Prime, a planet celebrated throughout the galaxy as a hub of culture, commerce, and unyielding social stratification, there lived a woman named Lyra. She was a Velixian, a species distinguished by their towering statures, their translucent, violet-tinged skin that shimmered softly in the ambient neon glow of the cityscape, and eyes that reflected every emotion like living prisms, shifting hues from sapphire blues to fiery oranges in the span of a moment. Despite this breathtaking appearance, Lyra was branded by her own kind as an outcast, a title as heavy and isolating as the cold steel that girded the city's endless towers. Her story was not one of success or grandeur, but of relentless rejection, of doors closed with polite indifference or sharp disdain, and of a loneliness that grew like a shadow following her every step. Erythra Prime was a place where status dictated every interaction, where the social ladder was not merely a metaphor, but a tangible force that separated those who thrived from those who were crushed beneath the weight of their peers' judgments. The Velix were a proud people, steeped in traditions of honor, political alliances, and the sacred rituals of bonding and mating that carried not just personal significance, but the very survival of their clans and legacies. From a young age, Velixians were groomed to fit within this rigid structure to navigate the intricate dance of favors, status displays, and alliances that kept the powerful in power and the marginalized on the fringes. Lyra, however, did not fit. Her ideas were unconventional, her demeanor too introspective for the brash, showy culture of her peers. She questioned the unquestionable, sought truths beyond the sanctioned histories, and preferred quiet contemplation over the ostentatious displays that marked social gatherings. It was this difference that led to her repeated isolation. Her early years were marked by a series of social defeats that gradually built into a fortress of solitude. Invitations to elite gatherings arrived only to be met with silence or gentle refusals. Her attempts to engage in conversations at scholarly symposiums were brushed aside, dismissed as naive or irrelevant. She had once dared to propose an alternative theory about the origins of their species, one that challenged the orthodoxy and threatened to unravel centuries of accepted wisdom. The backlash was swift and merciless. Friends became distant, colleagues cold, and whispers followed her like a ghost. In the tight-knit and competitive environment of the Velixian elite, such social exile was a sentence worse than death, for it stripped one of purpose, identity, and the possibility of companionship. Her physical beauty, which should have been a blessing in a society that prized aesthetics, only seemed to deepen the scorn. Those with influence coveted her allure, but saw her as a trophy to be owned, not a partner to be respected. When Lyra sought genuine connection, she found only the hollowness of interest driven by status games and political maneuvering. The mating rituals, sacred ceremonies that were supposed to bond souls and secure futures, became arenas of cruelty where she was passed over, dismissed, and discarded like an unwanted relic. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence and spirit, leaving her to wander the glittering streets of Erythra Prime, a ghost amid the bustling crowds. Her isolation was not just social, but deeply personal. Nights were the hardest. The glowing city lights that painted the skyline in electric blues and purples seemed to mock her loneliness. In her modest apartment overlooking the lower levels of the city, the place where neon signs flickered incessantly and the hum of hovercars filled the air, Lyra spent hours gazing out into the endless expanse, yearning for something more than the cold acceptance of her peers. Books, holovids, and data streams offered fleeting escapes, but they could not fill the void left by the absence of true companionship. She found solace in the ancient archives beneath the city, places where few dared to tread, filled with relics and records of forgotten histories and mysteries. It was here that Lyra felt most alive, surrounded by the secrets that no one else cared to uncover. One evening, as the twin moons of Erythra Prime cast their pale light across the city, Lyra sat hunched over a dusty holotable in the archives, her violet eyes reflecting the soft glow of ancient texts. She was deciphering a series of cryptic star charts when a sudden commotion echoed through the cavernous halls. The sounds of hurried footsteps and anxious voices reverberated off the stone walls. Curious but cautious, Lyra slipped out of her nook and moved towards the source. There, she saw a group of planetary security officers escorting a figure through the crowd, a human, by the look of him. Humans were a rarity on Erythra Prime, often viewed with a mix of fascination and suspicion. They were a hardy species, known for their resilience and unpredictability, but their presence was usually limited to diplomats or traders. This human was different. He was tall, but not as statuesque as the Velixians. His skin was a warm tan, his eyes steady and calm, and his movements unhurried despite the attention he drew. He carried no weapons openly, and his clothes were utilitarian rather than ornate. Yet there was an undeniable presence about him, an aura of confidence born not from status, but from an inner certainty that commanded respect. Lyra watched silently as the officers finished their escort and left the human standing alone in the archives. Something about him stirred a strange hope inside her, a feeling she had long buried beneath layers of hurt and cynicism. The human's gaze met hers for a brief moment, and in that instant, a silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of solitude, of worlds apart, yet somehow alike in their isolation. Lyra's heart quickened. For the first time in many cycles, she felt the faintest spark of possibility, the fragile glimmer of acceptance. She stepped forward, breaking the unspoken rule that outcasts must remain invisible. "You are far from home," she said softly, her voice carrying through the quiet hall. The human smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Yes," he replied in perfect Erythran, "and maybe that's exactly where I need to be." That night marked the beginning of a change that neither of them could have predicted. In a world where rejection was a sentence and acceptance a rare jewel, two beings from vastly different worlds found in each other a chance to be wanted not for status or advantage, but simply for who they were. But the road ahead would not be easy. Erythra Prime was unforgiving, and the forces that sought to keep Lyra isolated were many. Yet, with the humans' unexpected arrival, a new chapter was opening, one filled with hope, courage, and the possibility that even the most rejected could find their place in the stars. As the days turned into cycles, the presence of the human, who introduced himself as Marcus, began to ripple through Lyra's life in ways she had never imagined possible. Marcus was not just any visitor. He was an engineer from Earth, a planet distant and often dismissed as primitive by many Velixians. Yet, his skills with technology and machinery were unparalleled, and more importantly, his perspective was unlike anything Lyra had encountered before. Where the Velix clung to tradition and rigid social codes, Marcus saw the galaxy as a place of infinite possibilities, not confined by class or ancestry. Lyra found herself drawn to him, not merely because of his unshakable confidence or his rough, earthborn charm, but because with Marcus, she never felt the heavy weight of judgment. He treated her as an equal, a partner in discovery and conversation, never as a curiosity or an outcast. They would spend hours in the archives, Marcus fascinated by ancient Velixian technology, while Lyra absorbed his stories of Earth, stories of vast oceans, sprawling cities, and people who valued innovation and individuality over rank and appearance. Word of their growing alliance spread quickly, and as expected, it was met with skepticism and scorn by many in the upper echelons of Velix society. Whispers of Lyra's association with a human species often underestimated or outright ridiculed were used as ammunition to further ostracize her. Invitations became even scarcer. The elites saw her companionship with Marcus as a stain, a scandal threatening the sanctity of their traditions. Yet, paradoxically, it was this very bond that began to shift perceptions slowly. Some curious onlookers started questioning the rigid barriers they had accepted without challenge, watching Lyra and Marcus's collaboration as a beacon of a different kind of strength, one built on respect, trust, and genuine connection. For Lyra, the most profound change was internal. The gnawing loneliness that had plagued her for so long began to soften. The sharp sting of rejection dulled beneath the warmth of Marcus's unwavering acceptance. She discovered the courage to assert herself, to share her ideas openly without fear of derision. The human's belief in her capabilities and her worth was a revelation, something she had never before experienced in a world that measured value in influence and appearances. One evening, As they pored over a holographic star map, plotting routes to forgotten outposts and ancient relics, Marcus reached out and took her hand gently. "You've been carrying the weight of their rejection alone for too long," he said quietly. "But you don't have to anymore. You're wanted, Lyra. By me. By this universe that's waiting for you to claim your place." His words, simple yet profound, shattered the last barriers she had built around her heart. In that moment, surrounded by the glow of distant stars and the hum of ancient machines, Lyra understood something fundamental. Being wanted was not about fitting into a mold or winning approval from a society that refused to see her. It was about finding anyone who saw her true self and valued it without condition. Marcus, a human from a distant world, had given her that gift. And in doing so, he had begun to rewrite not only her story but perhaps the story of the Velixians themselves. Chapter 2. The Turning Tide. The days that followed were unlike any Lyra had ever known. With Marcus by her side, she navigated the complex social labyrinth of Erythra Prime with a newfound confidence. Their alliance had sparked intrigue and unrest alike, setting the wheels of change in motion within the city's towering spires and shadowed alleys. But change, especially in a society as entrenched in hierarchy as the Velixians, was never welcomed easily. Marcus's presence was an enigma that challenged everything the elite held sacred. His unyielding honesty, combined with an uncanny ability to repair and improve even the most ancient Velixian technology, earned him grudging respect from some and vehement hostility from others. Whispers in the corridors of power branded him a disruptive influence, a reckless human meddling in affairs far beyond his comprehension. Yet others saw in him the promise of a future unshackled from the chains of tradition. Lyra's transformation was even more striking. She was no longer the hesitant, rejected woman who lurked in the shadows. With Marcus's support, she had taken up the mantle of a scholar and a leader, advocating for change and inclusivity in a society that had long feared both. Her voice, once quiet and ignored, now carried weight. She challenged outdated customs, questioned the legitimacy of rigid caste systems, and inspired others who had been marginalized to find their own strength. Together, they embarked on daring expeditions beyond the city limits, exploring forgotten ruins and uncovering lost knowledge that promised to redefine Velixian history. These ventures were not without peril. Hostile factions, dangerous terrain, and ancient security systems tested their resolve at every turn. Yet each success bolstered their growing reputation as agents of transformation. But the path was fraught with tension. The Council of Elders, the ruling body steeped in centuries of tradition, viewed Lyra's rise with alarm. They convened in secret, plotting to discredit her and sever her bond with Marcus. Rumors of conspiracies and sabotage began to swirl, threatening to engulf them both. In the face of mounting opposition, Lyra realized that the acceptance she had found was fragile and that to protect it, she would have to fight harder than ever before, not just for herself, but for the hope of a more open and just society. Meanwhile, Marcus grappled with his own doubts and fears. Despite his outward confidence, he was painfully aware of the cultural chasm between them. How long could he truly belong in this world? How far would he go to stand beside Lyra in the face of such overwhelming resistance? Yet every time he looked into her eyes, he found the answer, a resolve mirrored back at him, fierce and unyielding. Their journey was just beginning, and as the twin moons of Erythra Prime rose again over the city, casting long shadows across its gleaming towers, Lyra and Marcus prepared to face the storm ahead. For in a universe that had rejected her time and again, she had finally found something worth fighting for, to be wanted, to belong, and to rewrite the fate of her people alongside the human who saw her not as an outcast, but as a queen in her own right. The city of Erythra Prime, with all its gleaming towers and intricate networks of hovering transit lines, had long been a monument to Velixian pride and power, but beneath its glittering surface simmered a tension that had been building for centuries. The arrival of Marcus and the rising prominence of Lyra sent ripples through every layer of society, from the affluent elite who dined in crystal palaces suspended above the clouds to the working-class laborers who toiled in the city's sprawling industrial sectors. No one could ignore the undercurrent of change, nor the threat it posed to the established order. For Lyra, This period was one of transformation and peril in equal measure. Every day brought new challenges, some overt, some subtle. Invitations that once were denied outright now arrived with strings attached, veiled threats hidden beneath formal politeness. Allies turned cautious, and even longtime friends distanced themselves, afraid that their association with her might invite ruin. Yet, even as the pressure mounted, Lyra found strength in the unwavering support of Marcus and the few who dared to stand with her. Marcus, for his part, was becoming a fixture in the city's evolving narrative, a symbol of hope to some, and a scapegoat to others. His skills as an engineer were nothing short of miraculous to the Velixians, whose technology, though ancient and formidable, had stagnated under the weight of tradition. Marcus's innovative approaches to repairing and enhancing these ancient machines sparked whispers of revolution in workshops and forums across the city. But his outsider status meant that no matter how many lives he improved or systems he restored, there were always those ready to undermine him. One particularly tense evening, Lyra and Marcus attended a public forum, a rare event where citizens could voice concerns and ideas to the Council of Elders. The great hall was vast, its walls adorned with shimmering tapestries depicting the history of the Velixian people. The air buzzed with anticipation and suspicion, as the elite prepared to confront the growing unrest that Lyra's growing influence represented. When Lyra took the podium, her voice rang out clear and unwavering. She spoke of unity, of embracing progress without sacrificing identity. She urged the crowd to look beyond old prejudices and to recognize that strength came from diversity and collaboration, not isolation. Her words struck a chord with many, inspiring hope and determination. But for others, particularly the council, her speech was an affront, a challenge to their authority, and a threat to their carefully maintained power. After the forum, Lyra and Marcus were ambushed by a group of influential nobles intent on intimidating them into silence. The encounter was tense, words sharp and heavy with veiled menace. But Marcus's calm resolve and Lyra's unyielding courage turned what was meant to be a warning into a declaration of defiance. They would not be broken. Their bond had become a beacon, a statement that rejection could be overcome, and that being wanted was not a privilege reserved for the elite. Behind the scenes, however, the council was orchestrating a campaign to discredit them. False rumors spread of Marcus's intentions and Lyra's alleged betrayal of Velixian values. Sabotage attempts were made on their equipment and expeditions. Yet, with every attack, their resolve only deepened. Allies emerged from unexpected places, young scholars inspired by Lyra's vision, artisans empowered by Marcus's innovations, and even some veterans of the old guard who saw the necessity of change. In quiet moments, away from the storm of politics and suspicion, Lyra and Marcus shared their dreams of a future where no one would face rejection because of who they were or where they came from. They imagined a society where strength was measured by empathy and courage, where being wanted meant belonging to a community that lifted each other up. This vision fueled their actions and bound them closer together. But the road ahead remained uncertain. Powerful forces in the city, fearful of losing their grip, were mobilizing. Old rivalries flared, and the threat of open conflict loomed. Lyra knew that to protect what they had begun to build, she would have to confront not only external enemies, but also the deepest fears and doubts within herself. For being wanted by one was a start, but being accepted by many would require a courage she had only just begun to discover. As Erythra Prime's twin moons rose once again, casting their silvery glow over the city, Lyra and Marcus prepared for what was to come, a battle not just for their place in society, but for the soul of their world. The opposition was relentless. Every success Lyra and Marcus achieved only seemed to provoke deeper resistance. Anonymous messages flooded Lyra's comlink threats wrapped in cryptic warnings. Their workspaces were vandalized, and expeditions sabotaged under cover of darkness. But what unsettled her most were the subtle betrayals, the hesitant glances from allies who, despite their admiration, feared the consequences of standing too close. The city, with all its gleaming heights and shadowed alleys, was a maze of uncertainty, and trust was a rare commodity. Yet, amid this mounting pressure, something extraordinary happened. A growing number of the younger generation began to rally behind Lyra's vision. Students at the great academies, artisans in their workshops, and even some mid-ranking officials who saw the futility of clinging to the past started to speak openly of change. They organized forums, petitions, and cultural events that celebrated diversity and innovation. Lyra and Marcus became symbols not just of rebellion, but of hope for a future where rejection would no longer define one's worth. Marcus, for his part, never wavered in his dedication. His presence was a constant reminder that acceptance could come from the most unlikely places, that kinship transcended species and origin. He tirelessly worked to repair ancient Velixian technology, breathing new life into relics thought lost to time. His unorthodox methods sometimes clashed with tradition, but their undeniable results made even skeptics pause and reconsider. The human engineer was no longer just a stranger, he was a catalyst. However, the Council of Elders was not idle. They orchestrated a plan to isolate Lyra, leveraging political influence and the ingrained prejudices of many to turn public opinion. Propaganda campaigns painted her as a threat to Velixian purity and order. They questioned Marcus's motives, insinuating he sought to exploit her for personal gain. The atmosphere thickened with suspicion and fear, and the streets echoed with murmurs of impending upheaval. One fateful evening, as Lyra and Marcus returned from a successful archaeological expedition that uncovered critical evidence challenging the Council's historical narratives, they were confronted by an armed militia loyal to the old guard. Surrounded in a narrow alleyway bathed in the eerie glow of neon signs, they faced their most dangerous test yet. Calm and resolute, Marcus stood firm, his engineering tools transforming into makeshift weapons, while Lyra called upon her knowledge of the city's hidden passages. Together, they escaped against the odds, their bond forged even stronger by the shared peril. In the aftermath, Lyra understood that the fight for acceptance was no longer just personal, it was a battle for the soul of Erythra Prime. Her journey from outcast to leader was only beginning. With Marcus's unwavering support, she vowed to confront the forces of rejection head-on, determined to prove that being wanted was a right, not a privilege. Chapter 3: Flames of Rebellion. The city was changing. Erythra Prime's glittering towers now bore the marks of unrest. Walls once pristine were streaked with vibrant graffiti proclaiming unity, freedom, and defiance. The cultural festivals that once celebrated conformity now echoed with music and speeches demanding transformation. Lyra and Marcus had become more than individuals. They were the heart of a burgeoning rebellion that transcended social strata and species lines. The Council of Elders, entrenched in centuries of power, responded with increasing desperation. They imposed curfews, censored communication channels, and deployed security forces to quell gatherings. Yet, the harder they pressed, the more the flames of rebellion spread. Underground networks coordinated efforts to smuggle knowledge and resources to those marginalized by the old order. Lyra, with her scholarly insight, became a strategist, guiding these efforts while continuing her public crusade for acceptance. Marcus's role evolved too. His engineering expertise was indispensable in crafting devices that disabled surveillance, reinforced safe houses, and facilitated communication across the fractured city. He worked alongside other human expatriates and sympathetic Velixian engineers, blending ancient technology with new innovations to outmaneuver the Council's grip. Their workshops hummed with activity, producing tools of both resistance and hope. But the stakes grew ever higher. The Council unleashed elite enforcers, veterans of past conflicts hardened by years of service, to hunt down the rebellion's leaders. Trust became both a weapon and a vulnerability. Lyra and Marcus operated from shadows and secret locations, always a step ahead, but never free from danger. Their relationship deepened in this crucible, their shared struggle forging a connection that was as much about survival as it was about love and acceptance. Amidst the turmoil, Lyra discovered allies in the most unexpected places, former adversaries swayed by her vision, scholars who had long questioned the status quo, and even factions within the Council itself who saw the inevitability of change. These alliances were fragile, held together by shared hopes and mutual need, but they were a testament to the power of being wanted not by many, but by those who truly mattered. As the rebellion's influence grew, so too did Lyra's resolve. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with sacrifice and uncertainty. But the promise of a future where rejection was replaced by belonging, where individuals were valued for their true selves, fueled her determination. With Marcus beside her, she was ready to face whatever trials awaited, ready to ignite the flames of revolution and reshape the destiny of Erythra Prime. The city pulsed with unrest, a living organism stirred awake after centuries of stifled breath. Beneath the gleaming towers and endless neon cascades of Erythra Prime, a new kind of energy thrummed, raw, defiant, and insistent. It was the energy of those who had long been silenced, pushed to the margins, and told they did not belong. Lyra felt it in every whispered conversation in shadowed alleys, every secret meeting in underground chambers, every stolen moment of hope traded between faces etched with hardship and determination. The rebellion was no longer a mere movement. It was a rising tide destined to break the dam of oppression. Lyra moved like a ghost through this charged landscape. Her once solitary existence now filled with purpose and the electric buzz of camaraderie. She was no longer the rejected outcast, but a beacon, sometimes a symbol, sometimes a strategist whose very presence galvanized those who had been broken by a society that valued lineage over merit, appearance over essence. Her voice, once soft and uncertain, now carried the weight of conviction, echoing through hidden forums and digital networks that the Council could not fully control. Marcus was her steadfast anchor amid the chaos. His workshop, tucked away in a disused sector beneath the city's oldest district, had become a hub of invention and resistance. Here, Velixian engineers and human expatriates worked side by side, fusing ancient technology with cutting-edge innovation. From silent drones that slipped through the Council's surveillance to devices that scrambled tracking signals, their creations were weapons in a war fought not with brute force, but with ingenuity and will. Yet, the Council was no stranger to ruthless power plays. As their grip tightened, so too did their brutality. Curfews were enforced with violent precision, gatherings dispersed by armored patrols, suspected rebels dragged away in the dead of night, never to be seen again. The once elegant cityscape became a cage of fear, its citizens walking the thin line between survival and rebellion. But oppression only stoked the fires of dissent. Where there was fear, there was also courage. Where there was darkness, the sparks of hope flared brighter. In the midst of this, Lyra found herself haunted not only by the threat of the Council's wrath, but also by the fragility of trust. The rebellion's successes had drawn many to its cause, but the stakes bred paranoia. Spies and saboteurs lurked within their ranks, turning friends into foes, alliances into traps. Every whispered conversation, every cautious glance carried the weight of suspicion. Lyra learned to guard her heart as fiercely as her plans, relying on Marcus's unshakable faith to steady her in moments of doubt. Their relationship deepened in this crucible, a bond forged in adversity and shared dreams. Marcus, once an outsider bewildered by the complexities of Velixian society, had become her partner not only in rebellion but in life. Their connection transcended species and culture, rooted in the fundamental human need to be seen, to be wanted, and to belong. Together, they were a living testament that acceptance could blossom even in the harshest soil. But the turning point came unexpectedly. Intelligence gathered from their covert operations revealed the Council's plan to deploy a new weapon, a pulse device capable of crippling the city's communications and disabling the networks that sustained the rebellion. Without these systems, the fragile web of coordination would collapse, leaving Lyra and her allies isolated and vulnerable. Faced with this threat, Lyra and Marcus orchestrated a daring counterstrike. They assembled a team of trusted rebels, each bringing unique skills forged in the shadows of Erythra Prime. Under the cover of night, they infiltrated the heavily guarded research facility where the pulse device was housed. The mission was fraught with danger, intricate security systems, patrols armed with lethal precision, and the ever-present risk of betrayal. In the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, tension crackled in the air. Every step was a test of nerves and resolve. Lyra's mind raced with contingency plans, her heart pounding with the weight of the rebellion's fate resting on their success. Marcus moved with practiced calm, his hands deftly disabling alarms and hacking into control panels. When they finally reached the core chamber, a fierce confrontation awaited. The Council's elite enforcers, clad in armor that gleamed like obsidian, stood between them and their goal. What followed was a battle of wills and ingenuity rather than sheer force. Marcus's devices disrupted the enforcers' systems, while Lyra's leadership kept the team coordinated against overwhelming odds. The Pulse device was dismantled with moments to spare, its threat neutralized before it could silence the city's heartbeat. Emerging from the facility, battered but victorious, Lyra and Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The Council's desperation would breed greater cruelty, but the rebellion had proven its resilience. The flames of change were no longer flickers, but a roaring blaze that would consume the old order or forge a new dawn. As dawn's light broke over the horizon, casting long shadows over Erythra Prime's skyline, Lyra stood beside Marcus atop a rooftop overlooking the city. For the first time in her life, she felt truly wanted, not because of rank or appearance, but because of the courage to stand, to fight, and to dream together. In that moment, the promise of belonging was no longer a distant hope, but a living reality. In the days that followed their daring mission, the rebellion gained momentum that even the most hardened skeptics could no longer deny. The Pulse device's destruction was more than a tactical victory, it was a symbolic strike against the Council's iron grip. Word spread through the city's underbelly, carried by whispers, encrypted transmissions, and graffiti scrawled on walls that defied the gleaming facades above. Change is coming, they proclaimed. No one is unwanted. Yet with every triumph came new sacrifices. The Council, desperate to maintain control, retaliated with brutal crackdowns. Safe houses were raided, leaders arrested or disappeared without trace. The rebellion's ranks thinned, but the spirit of resistance only burned fiercer. For many, Lyra and Marcus were no longer just leaders, they were the embodiment of hope, proof that the rejected could rise, that being wanted was not an illusion, but a right to be claimed. Lyra wrestled with the weight of this responsibility. The faces of those lost haunted her dreams, the burden of their hopes and fears pressing down like the city's cold stone. But in Marcus's steady gaze, she found solace and strength. Their bond, forged in the crucible of danger and shared purpose, was a sanctuary where acceptance was unconditional, where rejection had no place. One evening, as the twin moons cast their silver light over the restless city, Lyra stood on the balcony of their hidden quarters. Looking out at the sprawling metropolis, she was determined to change. Marcus joined her, his presence a comforting warmth against the chill of uncertainty. "We've come far," he said softly, "but the hardest part is still ahead." She nodded, determination hardening her features. "The Council won't give up easily. They'll try to break us, to crush the rebellion before it can reshape this world. But we won't let them. We have something they never understood: hope, and the will to be wanted for who we truly are." As they stood together, watching the city pulse with the lives of millions, some oppressed, some awakening, Lyra knew that their fight was more than a battle for acceptance. It was a fight to redefine the very soul of Erythra Prime. Chapter 4, A New Dawn. The final chapter of their struggle unfolded not in the grand halls of power, but in the hearts and minds of the people. The rebellion had ignited a revolution of consciousness, a reawakening of values long buried beneath tradition and fear. Lyra and Marcus, once outcasts and outsiders, became the architects of a new era. With alliances forged across species and classes, they led the charge to dismantle the Council's stranglehold. Public demonstrations swelled into massive gatherings of solidarity, forcing the elders to confront the undeniable truth that their era was ending. Negotiations began, tense and fraught, but marked by a willingness to listen that had been absent for generations. Lyra, now a figure of respect and inspiration, stood before the newly formed Assembly of Erythra Prime, a governing body inclusive of diverse voices and perspectives. Her speech was a declaration of transformation, a pledge that no one would ever again be rejected for their identity, their ideas, or their origins. Marcus, honored as a hero and symbol of unity, continued to innovate and inspire. Together, they rebuilt not just the city's infrastructure, but its spirit. The ancient technologies once wielded as tools of control were repurposed for progress and inclusion. As seasons passed, Erythra Prime blossomed into a society where the marginalized found their voices, where diversity was celebrated, and where being wanted was a universal right, not a privilege of the few. Lyra's journey from repeated rejection to revered leader was a testament to the power of acceptance and the courage to claim one's place. And in the quiet moments, far from the crowd's cheers and the weight of history, Lyra and Marcus found peace in each other, a love born not of necessity, but of profound choice and mutual respect. They were no longer defined by their pasts or the judgments of others. They were wanted. They belonged. The stars above Erythra Prime shone brighter that night, a celestial promise of new beginnings and endless possibilities. The dawn that broke over Erythra Prime was unlike any the planet had witnessed in centuries. The horizon blushed with hues of gold and violet, a reflection of the changing tides below. This was no ordinary sunrise. It was the birth of a new era, one shaped by the tireless efforts of those who refused to be cast aside. Lyra stood on the grand balcony of the Assembly Hall, the heart of the newly formed government, her violet eyes scanning the sea of faces before her, faces of every species, every caste, gathered not as rivals or outcasts, but as equals. The assembly itself was a marvel of unity. Representatives from every district, every faction, every culture had been elected or appointed with a mission to rebuild Erythra Prime on foundations of inclusion and respect. The centuries-old Council of Elders, once bastions of rigid tradition, had been replaced by this diverse coalition that embraced change without abandoning identity. Walls that once divided were dismantled. Bridges both literal and figurative were constructed. Lyra's voice, steady and clear, carried across the assembly floor as she addressed the crowd. For too long, our society has been shackled by fear of difference, fear of change, fear of those who do not fit the mold prescribed by outdated dogma. Today, we reject that fear. We embrace a future where every voice is heard, every soul valued. We will no longer measure worth by lineage or appearance, but by the courage to be ourselves and the compassion to accept others. Her words ignited a wave of applause that echoed through the grand hall and spilled into the streets. Outside, the citizens of Erythra Prime gathered in joyful celebration, their cheers mingling with the melodic hum of the city's restored systems. Holoscreens around the planet broadcast the moment live, transmitting the message of hope and renewal to every corner of the galaxy. Beside Lyra, Marcus watched with a mixture of pride and humility. His journey from a lone human engineer far from home to a symbol of unity on an alien world had been arduous and fraught with danger. Yet here, in this moment, it was clear that his presence had helped ignite a revolution not just of technology, but of the heart. The bond he shared with Lyra was no longer a secret whispered in the shadows, but a beacon visible to all. In the days that followed, the transformation of Erythra Prime accelerated. Educational reforms replaced indoctrination with critical thinking and empathy. Cultural festivals celebrated the vast mosaic of species and histories that made up the planet's population. Trade and diplomacy flourished as old enemies found new reasons to cooperate. Technologies that once enforced control were repurposed to elevate and empower communities. Lyra and Marcus dedicated themselves to guiding this new society. Together, they championed programs that provided opportunities for the previously marginalized, fostering innovation hubs where diverse minds collaborated freely. They worked tirelessly to heal the wounds of rejection and isolation that had scarred so many, creating networks of support and belonging. Yet, even amid progress, Lyra never forgot the path that had brought her here, the countless moments of rejection, the loneliness that once threatened to consume her. It was these memories that fueled her compassion and resolve, ensuring that no one would ever again feel unwanted or invisible. One quiet evening, as the twin moons of Erythra Prime rose in the sky, Lyra and Marcus stood hand in hand on a hill overlooking the city. The lights below twinkled like stars brought to Earth, a testament to resilience and renewal. They shared a silence filled with unspoken gratitude and hope. Marcus turned to Lyra, his eyes reflecting the moon's gentle glow. "We did it," he said softly. "Not just for us, but for everyone who believed in a better tomorrow." Lyra smiled, her heart full. "This is only the beginning. Together, we'll keep building until every being in this galaxy knows they are wanted, they belong, and they are free." As they embraced beneath the vast cosmos, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, whispering promises of endless possibilities. The story of rejection had become one of redemption, of love forged in adversity, and a future illuminated by acceptance. Erythra Prime had awakened, and with it, a new chapter for all who dared to dream beyond rejection. In the weeks that followed the historic Assembly Gathering, Erythra Prime underwent a profound transformation. The change was not just political or technological, it was deeply personal, woven into the very fabric of society. Old prejudices slowly unraveled as stories like Lyra's became shared narratives. Tales of rejection turned into celebrations of resilience and acceptance. The once rigid social order gave way to a culture that valued authenticity over status, empathy over exclusion. Lyra found herself at the center of this renewal, not as a ruler imposing change from above, but as a partner, a mentor, a symbol of hope for those who still doubted their place in the world. She traveled across the planet, speaking at schools, community centers, and forums, reminding everyone that to be wanted was not a privilege for the few, but a fundamental right of all sentient beings. Her speeches, infused with the sincerity born from lived experience, ignited sparks in countless hearts. Marcus, ever the engineer and innovator, spearheaded initiatives that connected distant communities through advanced but accessible technology, ensuring no one was left isolated or unheard. He and Lyra built a home that became a sanctuary for outcasts, dreamers, and pioneers, a place where diversity was treasured and every voice found a welcome ear. Their love, once forged in the shadows of rejection and hardship, blossomed openly and fiercely. They were no longer the outcast and the outsider, but the beating heart of a society reborn. Together, they demonstrated that acceptance could overcome the harshest barriers, and that being wanted was a powerful catalyst for change. One evening, beneath the starlit sky of their beloved planet, Lyra and Marcus stood hand in hand atop a hill overlooking the city. The twin moons cast a gentle light over a world transformed, a world where every being could walk with pride and hope. As a gentle breeze carried the sounds of laughter and celebration from below, Lyra turned to Marcus and whispered, "We were rejected again and again. But look at what we have created, something no one ever thought possible." Marcus smiled, his eyes shining with quiet conviction. It wasn't just us. It was everyone who refused to accept being unwanted. That's the real revolution. Their embrace was a promise not just to each other, but to all who had been cast aside, that the future belonged to those brave enough to claim their worth. As the stars stretched endlessly above, Erythra Prime stood as a beacon to the galaxy, a testament that rejection could be overcome, and that everyone deserved to be wanted, to belong, and to shine.